Hello everyone, my name is Neetu Dalal. Welcome back to my YouTube channel called Edu Classes, wherein we watch, learn and excel. In today's video, we are going to cover chapter 6 of class 12 psychology NCERT, which is attitude and social cognition. So without wasting any more further time, let's get inside in the video. Before we start, I would like to mention that in case you want the notes of the PPT that we are referring to in this video, you can always drop your email ID in the comment section, and I will make sure that as soon as the chapter's PPT is completely prepared, you get it in your mail, right? So let's not waste any more time and let's get started. So the topics that we're going to cover in this unit is your introduction, explaining what is social behavior, nature and components of attitude, attitude formation and change, prejudice and discrimination, strategies for handling prejudice, social cognition, schemas and stereotypes, impression formation and explaining, behavior of others through attribution, behavior in the presence of others, and pro-social behavior. So this is a comparatively lengthier chapter in comparison to what we usually have in your class 12th NCERT. So we would try to break it down in different videos and cover as much as possible in one given video. So let's start by understanding what is social psychology, right? So social psychology is that branch of psychology which investigates how the behavior of an individual is affected by others and the social environment. So this is that branch of psychology which deals with how people interact with each other, यानी लोग आपस में कैसे socialize करते हैं या आपस में कैसा behave करते हैं, उस पे आप पे उस behavior का आप पर क्या प्रभाव पड़ता है, ये हम समझने की कोशिश करते हैं सोशल साइकोलॉजी की ब्रांच में, ठीक है? We also try to understand how the behavior of individual is affected by others and the social environment. So we are talking about how the behavior of an individual is affected by how other people are behaving, but also how that person's behavior will get affected depending on वो कौन से social environment में या कौन से social setting में present है, right? So this chapter will describe the basic ideas related to a person's attitudes, social cognition, and pro-social behavior as explained by various social psychologists. So these are the three major topics we'll look at: attitudes, social cognition, and pro-social behavior in this chapter. So now starting with explaining what is a social behavior. We understood what is social psychology, but what do we consider as a social behavior? Now, social behavior is a necessary part of human life, and being social means much more than merely being in the company of others. यानी जो एक social behavior है इंसान का, वो एक हमारी humans के जीवन का एक बहुत necessary, बहुत जरूरी हिस्सा है. और social होने का मतलब ये नहीं है कि आप सिर्फ लोगों के company में हैं. It means much more than that. Social psychology deals with all behavior that take place in the actual, imagined or implied presence of others. Social psychology केवल उस behavior की बात नहीं करता है जो actual में हुआ हो, rather than it also talks about behavior which is actual. Of course, actual behavior we will talk about, but it also takes care of behavior which you imagine, which you think, if I'm talking to this person, if I'm talking to person A, then what kind of a conversation will I have? So social psychology is also concerned about that, right? Social environment influences our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in complex ways. Like I mentioned, that social setting is not just formed by being, present in the being there in the presence of others. It is also impacted by your social environment. यानी आपकी social setting क्या है? आप कौन सी country में हैं? What kind of friends do you have? What kind of a family thinking do you have? So that forms your social environment, and it affects the way you think. So it affects your thoughts. It affects how you feel. आपका social environment बहुत determine करता है आपके emotions आपको कैसे feel होंगे, right? And it also affects your behavior, right? So the setting that you are in affects your thoughts, emotions, and behavior in very complex ways. Because of social influences, people form views or attitudes about people and about different issues in life that exist in the form of behavioral tendencies, right? आप पे जो social influences exert होते हैं from the social setting, from which school are you in, what kind of friends do you have, are they open, are they conservative, all of this helps you form a view, or it also determines what kind of an attitude you will have about people, right? And what kind of opinions will you have about different issues. So the social influence that you get also impacts your views, attitude, as well as how you will think about a particular issue, and this would reflect in your behavioral tendencies. So when we meet people, we make inferences about their personal qualities. This is called impression formation. We all understand what impression formation is. What happens is that जब आप किसी इंसान को पहली बार मिलते हैं, या when you meet people, आप उनके बारे में कुछ conclusion करते हैं about their personal qualities, about their personality. This is known as how an impression is formed about a certain person, right? These are all terms which are there in your syllabus, and these can get asked, right? Why people behave in ways they do. Now, why do we behave, or why do people behave in the ways that they do, is that we assign causes to the behavior shown in specific social situation. This process is called attribution. यानी कोई इंसान अगर किसी सिचुएशन में पर्टिकुलर तरह से बिहेव करता है, तो हम उसके पीछे एक cause ढूंढ लेते हैं, और we try to understand as to why the person behaved in that manner, right? This process of rationalizing it, of trying to identify कि क्या reason रहा होगा, is known as attribution. Very often, impression formation and attribution are influenced by attitudes. अब आप किसके बारे में कैसा impression बना रहे हो और क्या reason attribute करोगे, ये दोनों ही चीजों किस चीज से influence होती हैं, आपका क्या attitude है. And like you must remember, we said that your attitudes get informed or get influenced by your social environment. Therefore, which means that your social environment is influencing your attitudes is influencing your impression formation and attribution. So therefore, social environment or understanding your social setting is very, very crucial, right? Now, these three processes are examples of mental activities related to the gathering and interpretation of information about the social world, collectively called social cognition. All these three processes are basically indicating what? That we are trying to understand and trying to gather how your social work or how your social world functions, right? That's what we are doing, whether it is impression formation, it is attribution, or it is attitudes. All of these three is helping us to understand how things work, or how information is gathered, or we are trying to interpret how people are behaving. This all forms your social world ka interpretation, and this together, this whole process is known as social cognition, right? Cognition basically means where you're using your decision making, you're using your higher mental capacity, thinking, decision, your rationality, right? So that is cognition. When you're applying it to social setting, that becomes your social cognition. Moreover, social cognition is activated by cognitive units called schemas. तो आपके जो social cognition है वो activate कैसे होता है? By cognitive units which are present, which are known as schemas, right? So these are some of the few new terms that have been introduced in this chapter, and you need to be very, very clear on what each of these terms mean. Now moving on. Cognitive processes cannot be directly seen. Of course, now I cannot see what the other person is thinking, right? So these are not things that we can see because it's not physically present. So they have to be inferred on the basis of externally shown behavior. These are things which we cannot physically touch or physically see, but these are things that we can observe in the way by which the other person is behaving, right? So for example, if you have a friend, you don't know what the friend thinks about you, right? Or how he what kind of an impression he has of you, but how do you understand it? You understand it by how is he behaving with you. If the person is nice to you, if the person is respecting you, you feel that the person thinks highly of you, or the person likes you, right? If it's the opposite way around, then you will probably conclude that the person doesn't not like me much. So आप जो सोशल कॉग्निशन की प्रोसेसेस हैं वो आप देख नहीं सकते हैं, टच नहीं कर सकते हैं, पर आप उन्हें ऑब्जर्व कर सकते हैं या उनका कंक्लूजन निकाल सकते हैं ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ कि सामने वाला इंसान कैसे बर्ताव कर रहा है आपके साथ. There are examples of social influence that are in form of observable behavior, right? Two such examples are social facilitation or inhibition, that is the improvement or decline in performance in the presence of others, and helping or pro-social behavior, that is responding to others who are in need of distress, right? यानी जो दो एग्जाम्पल्स हैं सोशल इन्फ्लुएंस के, वो आप ऑब्जर्व कर सकते हो, राइट? देयर आर टू एग्जाम्पल्स ऑफ सोशल इन्फ्लुएंसेस दैट कैन बी ऑब्जर्व्ड. वन ऑफ देम इज सोशल फैसिलिटेशन या सोशल इनहिबिशन, यानी किसी इंसान की परफॉर्मेंस में या तो बढ़ोतरी हो या फिर उसकी परफॉर्मेंस और घट जाए. क्यों? Because there are other people who are present in that scenario. It often happens that if a child has to perform in presence of 10 people, he will perform lesser than how much he can perform if he's just standing alone, right? So this is known as social facilitation. Social facilitation will be when, if there are people standing around or if there are people who are present and they are observing you, your performance will get better, right? This will be social facilitation, यानी लोगों ने आपको facilitate किया to perform better. But if it is opposite, यानी लोगों के खड़े होने से अगर आपका performance कम जा रहा है, then this would be an example of your social inhibition. ठीक है? तो this is one example of social influence. The other example of social influence is your pro-social behavior. Pro-social behavior is what? Responding to others who are in need or distress. प्रो सोशल बिहेवियर आप उस बिहेवियर को कहते हैं जहां पे आप किसी तीसरे इंसान की मदद करते हैं बिना अपने किसी फायदे के, राइट? सो फॉर एग्जांपल, इफ यू सी समबडी ऑन द रोड हु नीड्स हेल्प इन क्रॉसिंग द रोड, अगर आप उस इंसान को बिना अपने किसी फायदे के रोड क्रॉस करवा देते हैं, सो दिस वुड बी एन एग्जांपल ऑफ योर प्रो सोशल बिहेवियर. ठीक है? सो दिस इज रिस्पॉन्डिंग टू अदर्स हु आर इन नीड और डिस्ट्रेस. These two are behaviors that we can see, or examples where we see that the presence of others will influence how you will behave. ठीक है? In order to understand completely how the social context influences the individual, it is necessary to study both social cognitive processes and social behavior. यानी अब पूरे होलसम तरीके से समझने के लिए कि हाउ विल पीपल बिहेव और हाउ विल अ सोशल कॉन्टेक्स्ट इन्फ्लुएंस अ पर्सन्स बिहेवियर, दोनों पहलुओं को पकड़कर समझना बहुत जरूरी है, चाहे वो सोशल कॉग्निटिव पहलू हो या फिर वो आपका सोशल बिहेवियर का पहलू हो. सोशल कॉग्निटिव यानी आप कैसे सोच रहे हैं, और सोशल बिहेवियर यानी कि आप कैसे बिहेव कर रहे हैं. So to have an in-depth understanding of how a social context will impact, the understanding or the knowledge of both of these two or the observation of both of these two is extremely important. Now, how can we do this? Through systematic and objective observation and by adopting scientific methods, it is possible to establish logical cause and effect relationship to explain a social behavior. यानी अब अगर आप सिस्टमैटिकली और ऑब्जेक्टिवली किसी के बिहेवियर को ऑब्जर्व करते हैं या फिर आप साइंटिफिक मेथड्स अडॉप्ट करते हैं किसी के बिहेवियर को ऑब्जर्व करने के लिए, तो आप एक लॉजिकल कॉज एंड इफेक्ट रिलेशनशिप एस्टैब्लिश कर पाएंगे जो किसी के सोशल बिहेवियर को एक्सप्लेन कर पाएगा, राइट? सो हियर इन दिस चैप्टर we are all going to just try and understand how social behaviors are formed. We will try what are their different phenomena, we'll explain them, and we will try to understand how all of this impacts how a human behaves. ठीक है? तो जो पहला हमने बोला था, that we said that we will try to understand attitudes. अब किसी भी चीज को जो आप समझने जाते हैं, it's very important that you understand its nature and components. जब तक आपको यही नहीं पता कि वो चीज का क्या नेचर है या क्या what does it comprise of, you will not be able to understand it better, right? So in this we will define what an attitude is. How do we define it? An attitude is a state of mind, a set of views or thoughts regarding some topic, right? That topic will be called an attitude object, which have an evaluative feature, right? So what is an attitude? Your attitude will be anything. It is a state of mind, how you think about something. So for example, if let's just say that my topic or my attitude object is politics, right? अगर मेरा पॉलिटिक्स के बारे में क्या सोचना है, व्हाट इज माय स्टेट ऑफ माइंड अबाउट इट, हाउ डू आई थिंक अबाउट इट, वेदर आई थिंक इट्स पॉजिटिव, इट इज टू डर्टी, इट इज नेगेटिव, XYZ. In this example, your attitude object will be what? Politics. What will be my attitude about it? जो मेरा उस चीज के बारे में सोचना है. तो attitude basically क्या होता है? आपका किसी भी चीज के बारे में opinion, point of view, thoughts about any given topic at that point of time, right? And इस ऑब्जेक्टिव एटीट्यूड ऑब्जेक्ट का एक इवैल्यूएटिव फीचर होना चाहिए, यानी आप उसे पॉजिटिव कह सकते हैं, नेगेटिव कह सकते हैं, न्यूट्रल कह सकते हैं. मतलब देयर कैन बी समथिंग, देयर शुड बी अ फीचर दैट वी कैन use to describe that attitude, right? So attitude is a basic state of mind or views or thoughts that you have about a certain object or certain topic. Now it is accompanied by an emotional component and the tendency to act in a particular way with regard to the attitude object. For example, if there is a relative, ठीक है, for example, if it is my buaji, let's say, just a random example. For example, if it is my buaji, in this case, my views can be either positive about her or negative, ठीक है. So my attitude object in this example would be my buaji. My attitude would be whether I like her or I don't like her. So for example, let's say I like my buaji a lot, ठीक है. I really admire her. I'm very fond of her. What we are saying is that your attitude will always have an emotional component. You will be emotionally attached, or there will be an emotional hue to the component that you're talking about, or the attitude object that you're talking about. अब जो आपका इमोशनल फीचर होगा उस एटीट्यूड ऑब्जेक्ट के बारे में, आपकी टेंडेंसी होगी कि आप उसी कंपोनेंट के regard में आप behave करेंगे. You will have a tendency to behave with in regard or in synchrony to that emotion. So for example, now I told you in this example, attitude object is my buaji. My attitude is positive. So if she's coming to my family, my emotional component would be positive because I would want her to come because I like her. So my behavior will also be positive. So you see, my behavior would be in alliance with how I think about or what my attitude is. If my attitude is positive, my behavior will also lean towards positive. If my attitude would have been negative, my behavior would also have been negative. ठीक है? The thought component is referred to as the cognitive aspect. आप किसी चीज के बारे में जैसा भी आप सोचते हैं वो आपका thought component है और इसको हम technically cognitive aspect बोलते हैं. The emotional component is referred to as affective aspect. यानी जो आपने सोचा, that is your cognitive aspect of the topic. जैसा आपके उस चीज के बारे में emotions आए, that will be affective aspect of that topic. And the tendency to act is called the behavioral aspect. ठीक है, यानी हर एटीट्यूड के तीन फीचर्स हैं. फर्स्ट इज द थॉट थिंकिंग, दैट इज एटीट्यूड इटसेल्फ, वो हो गया कॉग्निटिव. आपका इमोशनल क्या है, वो हो गया अफेक्टिव, और आपने कैसे एक्ट किया या कैसे बिहेव किया, दैट इज बिहेवियरल. इजी टू अंडरस्टैंड, वेरी लॉजिकल, वेरी rational in a way. Now taken together, these three aspects have been referred to as the ABC components. ठीक है, इन तीनों aspects को साथ में मिलाकर हम कहते हैं ABC component. A stands for affective, which is emotional. B stands for behavioral, which is how you will act. And C is your cognitive component, which is how you think about a certain way. And this together is known as the ABC, the ABC component of attitudes. ठीक है? Attitudes have to be distinguished from two other closely related concepts, namely belief and values. So when we talk about attitudes, two very similar terms that come into our head are beliefs and values. And a lot of people have confusion as to what is the difference between these three terms, and that is what we will like to clarify here. Beliefs refer to the cognitive component of attitude. यानी हम ये मानते हैं कि जो attitude है, that is a composition of three components, right? पर जो belief है वो सिर्फ आपका cognitive component को ही refer करता है. And it forms the ground on which attitudes stand, such as belief in God, belief in democracy as a political ideology. So your belief is only talking about the cognitive component and not about the two. This is the difference between attitude and belief. Okay? Now, what are values? Values are attitudes or beliefs that contain a should or ought aspect. Values वो चीजें होती हैं which, for example, your moral values. These are things that you feel you should do or you ought to do. Like you should respect your elders. Now, your attitude about your elders could be different, but your values could be different, right? So, therefore, we say that these are things that you feel you should do or you ought to do. For example, moral or ethical values. One example of a value is the idea that one should work hard or that one should always be honest because honesty is the best policy. So these are the values that a person might have. And how are these formed? Values are formed when a particular belief or attitude becomes an inseparable part of a person's outlook on life. Values तब form होती हैं जब आप किसी चीज के बारे में कैसा सोचते हैं, यानी the cognitive component or the belief becomes solidified in your personality and it becomes very difficult to separate that belief from you, and therefore you start believing in certain values. ठीक है? So consequently, values are very difficult to change. So because they have become solidified in who you are, then values are very difficult to change if a person has one obtained them or one started abiding by those values, right? So this is the difference. Now, what are some of the significant features of attitudes, right? So in addition to your affective, cognitive and behavioral components, attitudes also have some other properties, right? And these other properties are, there are 4 significant features of attitude. That is valence, which could either be positivity or negativity. We will understand what each of these terms mean, but now here we are just naming them. So it will be valence, whether positive or negative, extremeness, simplicity or complexity, and centrality. So these are some of the significant features or significant properties that attitudes have, apart from the 3 components which are affective, cognitive and behavioral. So now first we will try to understand what we mean by valence, right? We said that valence is one of the properties of attitude, but it is very important to understand as to what it means. So the valence of an attitude tells us whether an attitude is positive or negative towards the attitude object. यानी ये हमें बताता है कि एक attitude की तरफ आपका जो outlook है वो positive है या negative है, right? यानी whether the attitude object that is in question, are you referring or are you looking at it from a positive value or from a negative value? This is known as valence, right? Example, suppose that an attitude, let's say towards nuclear research has to be expressed on a 5-point scale ranging from 1. यानी अगर आप किसी attitude को वो करना चाहते हैं, you want to see what kind of an attitude you have towards an attitude object. तो अगर हमारा attitude है nuclear research, हम उसे point दे रहे हैं on a 5-point scale जहाँ पे 1 means it is very bad and 5 means it's very good, right? So if an individual rates his or her view towards nuclear research as 4 or 5, this is clearly a positive attitude. यानी अगर आपने उसे 4 या 5 दिया, इसका मतलब है जो आपका attitude है towards nuclear research, that is pretty positive. This means that the person likes the idea of nuclear research and thinks it is something good. On the other hand, if the rating is 1 or 2, the attitude is negative. Opposite to this, अगर आपने 1 या 2 वो चूज किया है, this means कि आपका जो attitude है towards nuclear research, that is negative. This means that the person dislikes the idea of nuclear research and thinks that it is something bad. ठीक है? We also allow for neutral attitudes. In this example, a neutral attitude towards nuclear research would be shown by a rating of 3 on the same scale. यानी अगर कोई इंसान 1 या 2 या 4 या 5 चूज ना करके 3 चूज करे, it means ना तो इंसान का जो एटीट्यूड का व्यू पॉइंट है वो पॉजिटिव है ना नेगेटिव है, द पर्सन इज प्रीटी न्यूट्रल अबाउट दैट एटीट्यूड. ठीक है? अ न्यूट्रल एटीट्यूड वुड हैव नाइदर पॉजिटिव नॉर नेगेटिव वैलेंस. तो जो आपने ये एटीट्यूड चूज किया है, अगर आप 1 या 2 करते हैं तो इट विल मीन दैट योर valence is negative towards that attitude. You have a negative valence. If you've chosen 4 and 5, this will mean that you have a positive valence towards that attitude. If you've chosen the neutral one, it means आपका जो वो है ना वो positive है ना वो negative है. It's a neutral valence that you have towards the attitude. ठीक है? Second property that we have talked about is your extremeness. So the extremeness of an attitude indicates how positive or how negative an attitude is. अब positive valence है वो 4 भी positive है 5 भी positive है, पर extremeness क्या दिखाता है कि कितना positive है. So 5 will be more positive than 4, right? So taking the same example, the rating of 1 is as extreme as the rating of 5. यानी अगर आप 1 choose कर रहे हैं तो वो extreme negative viewpoint है, और 5 choose कर रहे हैं तो वो extreme positive है. Right? They are only in opposite direction. यानी extremeness में वो same है, सिर्फ क्या है आपका जो valence है वो positive या negative है, right? So -5 और +5, if you see on a scale, so -5 और +5 जो magnitude का number है, जो extremeness है वो same है. नीचे भी -5, नीचे भी 5 की value है, ऊपर भी 5 की value है, पर पॉजिटिव है या नेगेटिव है वो आपको वैलेंस से पता चलेगा. एक्सट्रीमनेस में दोनों सेम है. So we can say that something which is opposite, which is extreme, it will be 1 and 5. Something which is in the middle, for example 2 or 4, will be less extreme in comparison to 1 and 5, right? A neutral attitude of course is lowest on extremeness. यानी अगर अब मुझे वो करना पड़ जाए, हायरार्की बनानी पड़ जाए, so I will say that 1 and 5 are the most extreme, then it is 2 and 4, and then the lowest would be your neutral attitude. Okay, so this is what, how extreme your attitude is determined by extremeness of the attitude. Next is simplicity or complexity. This feature refers to how many attitudes there are within a broader attitude. Think of an attitude as a family containing several member attitudes. Yani there are many attitudes which comprises of many attitudes within themselves. So imagine one attitude which is a bigger attitude, and then there are n number of small attitudes which get fit into it. Okay? In case of various topics such as health and world peace, people hold many attitudes instead of single attitude. An attitude system is said to be simple if it contains only one or a few attitudes, and complex if it is made up of many attitudes. यानी अगर कोई attitude एक या दो या तीन attitude comprise करता है तो वो attitude will be called comparatively simpler attitude. कोई ऐसा attitude, for example like world peace or health, is an attitude which comprises of many attitudes within themselves. So we will refer this kind of an attitude to be a complex attitude. Now they've given an example. Consider the example of health and well-being. This attitude system is likely to consist of several member attitudes. यानी अगर हम एक attitude को एक family की तरह देख लें, तो फिर इस family में बहुत सारे members हैं, such as one concept of physical and mental health, views about happiness and well-being, and beliefs about how one should achieve health and happiness. So अगर आप well-being को देख लें तो इसके अंदर भी आपके क्या हो गया, mental health, physical health, happiness, well-being, how you should stay fit, what is the right way to achieve health and happiness. All of these will be minor attitudes within a bigger attitude. So therefore this attitude will be an example of your complex attitude. By contrast, the attitude towards a particular person is likely to consist of mainly one attitude. Yani, in opposition to this, if we are to say that what is your attitude towards this person, right? वहाँ पे आपका एक ही attitude होगा. So this will be an example of your simpler attitude. The multiple member attitude within an attitude system should not be confused with the three components described earlier. This is not in any way in parallel to what components we've read. It just means कि आपका जो attitude है वो कितना complex है, उसके अंदर कितने sub attitudes हैं या नहीं है. Each member attitude that belongs to an attitude system also has ABC component. यानी हर attitude चाहे वो कितना भी छोटा हो, उस हर सिंगल एटीट्यूड का भी अपना एक एबीसी कंपोनेंट होगा. सो ईच एटीट्यूड विल ऑलवेज हैव अ एबीसी कंपोनेंट, and a complex attitude will have n number of attitudes, each consisting of their own ABC component, right? Now, the next feature or the next property of attitude is centrality. This refers to the role of a particular attitude in the attitude system. यानी वो attitude क्या role play करता है आपके attitude system में. This is determined by the centrality of that attitude. जिस एटीट्यूड की ग्रेटर सेंट्रलिटी है दैट विल इन्फ्लुएंस अदर एटीट्यूड्स इन द सिस्टम मच मोर देन नॉन सेंट्रल एटीट्यूड्स. यानी कुछ एटीट्यूड्स ऐसे होते हैं, देयर आर सम एटीट्यूड्स व्हिच आर वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टू अ पर्सन, राइट? सो फॉर एग्जांपल, फॉर महात्मा गांधी, ठीक है, his attitude towards non-violence was a very central attitude in who he was. So this attitude will influence many other नॉन सेंट्रल एटीट्यूड्स. यानी उनका ये जो एटीट्यूड है टुवर्ड्स नॉन वायलेंस वो इतना प्रेवलेंट है या इतना सेंट्रल है उनकी पर्सनालिटी में कि ये जो एटीट्यूड है ये उनकी बाकी पर्सनालिटी ट्रेट्स के जो एटीट्यूड्स हैं उन्हें, या हिज एटीट्यूड्स टुवर्ड्स डिफरेंट ओपिनियंस और डिफरेंट ऑब्जेक्ट्स will get influenced by this central attitude. So that's what it says, that an attitude with greater centrality would influence the other attitudes in the system much more than non-central or peripheral attitudes. For example, in the attitude towards world peace, a negative attitude towards high military expenditure may be present as a core or central attitude that influences all other attitudes in the multiple attitude system. इन्होंने जो example दिया है वहां पे इन्होंने जो central attitude consider किया है, they have said that if you have a negative attitude towards high military expenditure, यानी आपका जो attitude है आप ये चाहते हैं कि military में बहुत ज्यादा high expenditure ना हो, then this will impact all the decisions or all the attitudes that you will have towards world peace. So if I'm thinking कि military expenditure ज़्यादा नहीं होना चाहिए and this is how I want to attain world peace, then my way of attaining world peace will be very much different, and therefore my attitudes towards having a war will also be very different, right? So this central attitude will affect a lot of other minor attitudes that you will have towards a particular object. Now, till here we have talked about, we have understood what are some of the important definitions of few terms. We've understood what is attitude, we've understood its nature, we've talked about some of its properties. Now we will talk about how an attitude is formed and changed, right? So that is what we are going to take on in the upcoming slides or in the upcoming sections of this video.